Welcome back to the Recruitment Smart episode 7. And thank you for joining us again on the podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by an old friend of mine who I've known for about a decade, Danelle DeLibrerio, who is a lifelong HR and talent acquisition professional. Very interesting career. Someone who I've seen, I think, through 3 or 4 roles. And what I would say as being someone who is always pushing on innovation, whether that's technology or methodology, and someone who is a real practitioner, hands on talent acquisition, transitioning into HR people functions, which I think is the direction of travel of heads of talent acquisitions these days. So, Daniel, uh, thanks for joining me. Great to speak to you again. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, well, that was a great introduction, and thanks, Bill. And you're right, it has been over a decade, I think almost a dozen or so years since we first met and have been working in various ways with each other, even though there's a pond between us. As you mentioned, I have been in HR for over 25 years, primarily focused in the world of talent acquisition at the start of my career, but as many people in talent acquisition know, that's not where you spend all your time. You can't sit siloed. You spend time understanding compensation, you understand benefits, you understand operations and systems and tools. And so having those experiences over the many years in talent acquisition allowed me about 5 or 6 years ago now to move into the head of people position, and was there's no necessary playbook for that when you're moving from talent acquisition into what I refer to as the big seat. But moving into that role, I think that we're seeing more and more of that trend where talent acquisition has set people up to be prepared to move into that seat and understanding experience, efficiency, systems, tools, and like you said, truly, hands-on practitioners. So, been in that role now in 2 different organizations for about 7 years, and really am enjoying it.
So, what's the difference in the people world? For a lot of people, we've seen it happen increasingly in the last 2 or 3 years. More and more people going from head or even global head of talent acquisition into people.
Mm-hmm.
A different business card, a different title. But what's the real difference in terms of responsibility and where you sit in the organisation?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that I would say, so similarity wise, so much of being in talent acquisition is really understanding the business and what are the needs of the business, what's the strategy, how are the resources that we're going to need going forward, play into this quarter, next year, where's our footprint growing. And so when you know that information, it helps you acquire talent in the right place. Sitting at the head of people, or CPTO, or whatever the role is that you're sitting at, like you said, different business card title. Again, it's a similar mindset of you're at the forefront with the leadership team, as part of the leadership team, creating that strategy, taking your understanding of supply and demand and where talent hubs are. How do you use that to help support the strategy and the go forward of the business? And then also, I think the other thing that you have to really be mindful of is, candidate experience has always been, at the heart of what recruiting wanted to make sure was sort of this positive score, right? That the candidates came out saying, I really enjoyed my interaction with the team. My relationship with the recruiter was a major reason why I took the call, or I said yes, or I got to the point of accepting the offer. And what ultimately you have to think about when you move into the people role and the head of HR role is the candidate experience has to translate to what the employee experience is like. They can't be two separate things. So when you move into this role, you do spend a lot of time making sure that what is happening at the candidate level is also representative at the employee level, and that the two don't feel like two separate, you don't want it to ever be a bait and switch, right? Like, I was recruited into this company, but now I work here. You want it to feel like it's a seamless process of going from candidate to offeree to employee.
That's excellent. Just to give people some context, tell me a little bit about the organisation you work for, the kind of size and headcount and so on.
Sure. So I am currently at an IoT organization, so an Internet of Things company. We provide AI technology and insights to manufacturing and production lines, predictive maintenance for the world of manufacturing and production. We have about 350 or so employees globally, about half in the US and the other half outside of the US. And then we also have these hubs and also augmentations of our teams in different locations as needed.
And you've been in this role for how long?
I actually joined in February, so really have been sinking my teeth in for the last 8 months into the organization, which has been an exciting time.
So what I'm really interested in this is you work for an AI company,
I do.
and you've come up, I wouldn't say from traditional organisations, but you've come from outside of that field.
I did, yeah.
And you've been coming in at kind of, I know AI has been around for a long time. We can talk about it for over a decade, but I think the reality of what we're seeing delivered has been in the last 18 months, 2 years, really.
The popularity, I guess, is really.
And that it's been on everyone's line. What's the difference working for an AI company, and what are you seeing, and what are you thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I would say for the last, the position prior to this one was also with an organization that did, AI and understanding and information. And so when you think about my career, a lot of it is talking to my peers to understand where are they versus where am I. And I would say there tends to be the conversation around just the understanding of what it means, as well as, and I don't necessarily want to say fear, but more of this, what does this mean for my organization? What does this mean for my job? How do I do this in a safe and compliant way? And then how do you get and not just the HR team, but how do you get your employees to be comfortable using AI on a day-to-day basis? Or how do you get your company to allow for your employees to be using it in a safe and compliant way? So, I think years and years and years ago, where there were organizations that would block the internet access for their employees to be on LinkedIn, right? Because it felt like this was a social site. Maybe people were looking for another job when they were at work, and so they would block the access for their employees to be on LinkedIn during the day. Where and that has evolved and changed over time. There's also companies now who are not necessarily sure about AI, right? You always have vast majority or laggards who aren't always ready, and so they are maybe not giving the quote unquote permission to their employees to utilize AI. And that, when you work at an AI company, that permission's there. It's expected. The finding the supporting the support that AI can give you versus the fear of replacement. And that's really freeing, I think, for our organization.
And what are you seeing? So working in an AI company, what are you seeing in your role and in talent acquisition that you're adopting, or that maybe you haven't seen before, or that's coming? What's your thinking around talent acquisition, HR, AI?
Yeah. So what I am seeing across the board, what I'm hearing, what I'm having conversations about is really, and we can talk specifically about talent acquisition, is that AI is not here to replace the recruiter. And I think that so many misnomers are out there, especially from a candidate perspective. Oh, I submit it, just goes to a bot. They're going to need less recruiters because the systems will just filter, source, and schedule, and then the system will pump out a offer letter and we're done. I really don't see that as what's happening. It's really more about this relationship of how does AI support the recruiter so they can be relieved of some of their repetitive tasks or tasks that they don't find energy or their strength in, so that they can spend more time building those relationships and spending time with the candidates to really provide a more customized and personalized experience and relationship to guide them into an organization. So you had something? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Like you were going to say something.
what kind of tasks are we talking about? What tasks have been
Yeah.
replaced by technology?
Sure. So I think the first is just even market analysis. Where is the talent? Understanding, analyzing labor markets and trends, especially if you have a global workforce and you're not sitting in a specific location. There's a little bit of a vibe of, I know where I am and I know what the traditional types of talent supply and pools are here, but, where are they in other locations? What does that look like? So I think taking AI, taking those tools to analyze labor market trends and some competitor activity is really helpful as recruiters start to target certain locations for roles. And then also, I think thinking about skill forecasting. We start to really try to predict what some future talent needs are going to be, what some emerging skills are going to need. And that'll help us, I think, proactively address some of the talent gaps that an organization has and be able to relay that back to hiring managers as well as executives as strategies for the next year are brought. So that would be the first, when you think like, how do we even start the recruiting process? You understand where the talent is. That would be the first thing. I think the second thing really becomes this like repetitive task. Not every recruiter is created equal. We all have very different skills. We all have very different things that we do well, or should I say things that we like to do or not like to do. So, some recruiters are, really great at, the relationship building, and maybe they're good at scheduling, but they're not good at sourcing. Maybe they're good at sourcing, not good at scheduling. Maybe they don't like to make decks to show the analytics of all of how they're doing throughout, the month or the year. And so having an AI tool with those tasks helps you move those off your plate a lot faster. So one, they're not looming. Two, your energy level stays up. And three, it allows you to have more time to focus on the actual relationship and the human to human contact with a candidate. And so again, using AI for your analytics or your decks or your scheduling is extremely helpful. I think the third thing I would say is, from a candidate perspective, I know we talk a lot about candidate experience. A big thing candidates say is, I never heard back from anybody, or if I did, it was generic. It would have been nice if it was a little bit more personalized. AI can help provide personalized feedback. AI can help provide questions or help guide a candidate through a process, or offer suggestions upon rejection or upon moving to a next stage in the process. And so again, these are things that can be built and created or can be learned using AI, which will enhance a candidate experience. Again, not replacing the recruiter. And then I would say the final, or I'm sure there's tons of things we could put in between here, but the final thing that I really see it as a augmentation to the recruiting team is it's going to give the insights on how we're doing, right? So, what is the data? What worked? What didn't work? How do we refine our process? How do we refine, how we're doing as a team, as an individual, with a certain kind of candidate, with a certain location? Really taking all those insights and helping continually learn. So, those would be sort of the 4 areas I would kind of jump into from a talent acquisition standpoint, but really across the board from an HR standpoint. It doesn't necessarily have to be about talent acquisition only.
So when we're talking about talent acquisition, you brought up the subject of candidate experience, which in fact I think is how we first met, through the candidate experience awards when you
Right.
when you were a winner at RMS way back when, and some of the things that were really I think one of the things I'm really thinking about is, how do the candidates feel about automated processes?
Well, every person is different, so I can't say that each person would across the board say they love it holistically. As a people, we should say this is probably acceptable and this is not acceptable. So you submit a resume and you get an automated reply saying it has a confirmation it's been submitted. That's mostly acceptable by all people. A generic 3 a.m. email that says thanks but no thanks after I've gone through multiple rounds, probably not acceptable by most people. So I think what you have to be thinking about is like, where does it work in the process? Where, as the empathy associated with the human being on the other side of this, if you were applying, where would you want to have that interaction with a person versus where would you be okay with getting some kind of automated response or technology driven decision? So I would say, you have to think about it. One of the things, I think you brought up the Candidate Experience Awards with RMS all those years ago. One of the reasons that we won one of those awards those years ago was we had, and I know this is going to sound so archaic now, but believe me, for those listening, it was cutting edge at the time. We're talking almost, I think, 14 years ago. We had an Ask Me Anything window open on our career page where the recruiter and the talent acquisition team would man this Ask Me Anything window. So any candidate would be able to ask a question like, what should I wear? What's the actual address? Do you have to pay for parking? Like all different kinds of questions candidates ask leading before an interview that to sort of ease their nerves. This anonymous way to ask questions without trying to get their recruiter on the phone or somebody else or sort of a last minute. And we had this window open during normal business hours, Monday through Friday, and we were available to answer all these different kinds of questions, and it really enhanced the candidate experience. Now, can that be replaced by AI? Probably. I don't see why not, as long as the information it's giving back is accurate and helps the process and doesn't give false information to hinder the candidate and their experience. But, something like that might be able to be switched out. It didn't necessarily matter who was on the other side of that. Now, when it was time to give feedback and how did the interview go and, how did you do? That was a relationship. That was a recruiter calling the candidate, talking to them, having that conversation. Again, I don't see that should be replaced. So, I want to be really thoughtful about, there's lots of different touch points where you can implement technology, but probably shouldn't. And that really comes down to
what's the example of that. Give me an example of where you would say you shouldn't or you wouldn't, personally.
Personally, I wouldn't just send an offer without calling the candidate first, right? I wouldn't just have my system as soon as I move them to an offer stage, I wouldn't want the letter to just pre-populate and send without me having to call the candidate or the hiring manager to call the candidate and really talk to them and have a conversation about them. This is going to be, they're going to be joining our organization, joining our team. It's the start of a beautiful friendship, right? The point of that is to have that interaction with each other. Just getting something in the mail, I would say that would probably be a big no-no if it just was an automated offer letter that just got shot over before a conversation occurred. And again, I'm not even saying it has to be, pre-close them or anything like that. It's just more of what you want to offer the good news to somebody that they've been offered the role verbally versus it being just an automated message that's sent over.
So I think what I'm hearing from you is I tend to look, although I think of AI, I think we glaze over a little bit about the AI tool. And I think about what I'm describing as intelligent automation, which I think is going to ultimately become a category of technology, which is where we're looking at what tasks, what's the workflow. If we're working agents rather than co-pilots, how do they work together? Each agent is a task. This is the task we want you to do. There might be 70 to 100 of those tasks in a whole hiring process. Now we could automate most of that, if not all of that. Probably we'd want to automate the interview, but I think it's then once you've got that process set out, you overlay it with actually where do we want people involved and what do we want people doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the point that we're talking about, that we
Yeah,
can, because we can doesn't mean we should.
that's right.
But where can we genuinely add value in having a person at the end of that conversation and that relationship? And it's all about relationship, really, from what you're saying to me, is actually we've been given time back by technology
That's right.
to,
Yeah.
to actually do things that maybe we've always wanted to do and haven't really had time.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing is, and look, the last 4 years, almost 5 years now, have been extremely odd in the sense where we relied so heavily on everything being through a screen or through technology that we lost even the human interaction of a face to face or the ability to come together. And so, what I'm starting to see more and more is this resurgence of people very excited to say, "Oh, I'd love to come on site. Yes, I'll fly there. Great, let's grab coffee rather than having a phone screen." People want to have that connection again. They want to be more than a piece of paper, right? A resume's paper thin, and humans are so much more complex than what's on that piece of paper. And so the ability to finally get in front of the recruiter, even though they may not be the hiring manager or ultimate decision maker, they are very influential in the hiring process and very much your advocate. I think candidates are starting to recognize that when you point and click and hit submit and your resume goes to 1 or 100 companies in that one shot, how do you differentiate yourself? Yes, you're using, from a candidate perspective, the AI tools that match the words in the description to change the words in your resume so you show up as a greater match. And the candidates have their own AI tools that they're doing. But when it really comes down to how do I differentiate myself, a lot of it is about how did I get in front of the recruiter to really tell my story about who I am and why I'm interested. We hear it all the time. People say, I submitted it, I already see online I'm one of 180 people who applied. The job's only been posted for an hour. What are the odds? What's the chances? If I could just talk to them, they would know that I'm the perfect person, even though my resume not be, who doesn't stand out amongst everybody else. How do you really showcase who you are? And a lot of that comes to, the face to face and the time together and the ability to form that relationship. And so I think we're starting to see the resurgence of people saying, if AI and technology from the recruiting side can take a lot of the administrative tasks off my plate, I do have more time to meet up with a candidate somewhere or, see them off hours on their own, stomping ground, or grab coffee, or, have them come in if you're still coming to an office. So, it just becomes a very different kind of experience.
I think that's super interesting. You brought up a point, which is something I'm talking about with people all the time, and that's that the candidates have got AI tools. It's not exclusively our side of the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of conversations about is that cheating? What is it? How serious are the candidates when it's a machine applying to multiple opportunities? I mean, what's your thoughts? What's your views, and how are you countering that?
Well, I don't necessarily know it's about countering it, right? It's how do we learn to live with it? How do we learn to also use it? So yeah, so candidates will always try to optimize their resumes, whether they're doing it through using a thesaurus, to getting a resume writer, to using AI. So optimizing your resume is always going to be something candidates have done. And will be something they always do. The tool they use will have changed, but making sure that as you're reviewing the resume, you are really looking for the key things that you need to see for the role you have. I think that it's interesting. You can't fake I mean, I guess you can fake a skill, right? But if AI starts to identify your skills and puts them onto your resume, but they're false, the onus is on the candidate to make sure that whatever AI has done to create their resume to match the job description, that it is actually still who they are and not just the perfect resume for the job, but it does still reflect who they are and the skills that they have. So I would, my caution would be, it's great that the resume now perfectly matches what I'm looking for as an organization, but is this still really you? So I think, as many teachers will tell students now, yes, it's okay to use, an AI tool for but the original thought has to be yours, right? You should just use AI to I guess, enhance and support, not completely create from the beginning. I love the idea that AI is helping with interview preparation. So many amazing candidates are just not great interviewers. And so this AI enhanced and AI simulators that help with interview preparation, I think are awesome. Now, they become, your word, like cheating when you're doing a Zoom call and the AI answers are already pre-built on the left-hand side of the screen, and the recruiter can't see it. But I guess that's no different than if I had just really been prepared and had all my questions up and ready to go, as I would if I was doing a video interview myself. One of the tricks we used to tell students all the time was tape your resume to the wall behind your screen. So at any given point, you could glance up at it and remember some of your bullet points. That's no different than having your notes on the side, whether you wrote them or an AI tool wrote them. Where it starts to, the proof is going to be in the pudding. You hope you're not just doing all your interviews virtually. You do hope that you get somebody face to face at some point, that preparation really comes through, that they are, when a potential candidate gets to that point, that they can now live without the supporting documentation and the supporting tools. So, again, what I would say is I'm not anti it, but I want to make sure that the candidate doesn't rely on it so heavily that they almost can't be interviewed or assessed without it, or interviewed and assessed properly, because it's not really who they are. So, again, I think that's sort of the cautionary tale. Like, use what you can, but make sure it's accurate and be ready to talk to it and be ready to not necessarily have it available when you come to that one-on-one without anything in your hand.
I think that's a really interesting answer. And something that comes to mind is I've been having a lot of conversations around particularly the early careers space, where there is less to differentiate the candidates and all the applications can look perfect when they've been AI produced. And what I think has been the really interesting outcome is that, having spent a decade or so trying to digitalize the assessment process, effectively replacing assessment centers, making them digital experiences, making them simulations, some fantastic tools and work in that area. Now what they're looking at is actually going back to in-person assessments and getting face-to-face as quickly as possible in the process. I think that's a good thing for the candidate. I think that's a good thing for the companies. But I think it's interesting that we're seeing that upshot as a result of fear of AI candidates all looking the same.
But it's interesting. I started my career as a university recruiter, campus recruiter, where I worked for an organization. My responsibility was to be the recruiter with the relationship with X number of schools. My role was to be on that campus as much as possible, to know the students, know the professors, understand the coursework. It was more than just like be the liaison to that school. It really was a recruiter in residence type of position, where you spent as much time as you could on that campus, getting to know the students and being available to understand the differences, because new grads and new hires and uni grads, their resumes are going to look alike whether AI wrote them or not. Their resumes are going to look alike because their experiences are pretty darn close up until that point. The coursework they've taken are pretty darn close up until that point. and the career office that's supporting them are the same people. And so the format of the resume might look identical, and the suggested analytics that they put on there might be identical. And the differentiator used to be clubs and sports or interests versus maybe and GPA if the school even had a GPA. So that was why it was so important to have a targeted university recruiting team, was because that is what differentiated, was knowing, you would get binders full of resumes that all looked identical or similar in nature. And how did you actually tell the difference? And which student was really interested in your organization and which one would come? And it started with the relationship that the recruiter had on that campus. And like you said, we went so far from that, and we're coming back. But there are amazing organizations out there that still have dedicated talent acquisition teams only focus on university recruiting because of that notion that so many of the resumes were alike.
Were alike. So this is not a new problem. It's not a new problem.
It is for the experienced hires, right? It is for the professional hire, experienced hire, executive, I guess, whatever the terminology your company uses. Yeah. But from a new grad perspective, if you've ever spent any time in university recruiting, this is not a new problem.
It's not a new problem. And I think we're at a really interesting stage. And I've been thinking more and more in terms of what you said in really the first 5-10 minutes of today's show. And that's around the creating time. Now, I think we've been, and also that this isn't coming for your job. It's quite interesting. We had an episode out just released from Grant Weinberg, who I think you know. And Grant was saying, look, and went off and said, let's start off and say, this is not coming for your job. And some of the feedback in the subsequent chat and comments, Jacob Sten-Madsen and a couple of people saying, actually, how could it not be coming from your job when it's automating the work? And I take that on board to a certain extent, but I also feel we have to look at AI and technology in the context of today's market. And this is where we're at. From post-COVID, hiring teams significantly increased in terms of headcount. It could be argued that over-expanded significantly, and as a result had to overcut, because that was closely followed up by some pretty tough economic conditions across the world, which meant less hiring, which meant less recruiters. And we've seen team sizes shrink down to about 40%. We're seeing some recovery from that, not significant, so we're not dancing in the street. But what I'm seeing is that's about the right headcount size, and more of the people being hired into recruiting are coming into strategic roles, like, for example, talent insights or people or career development, different kind of roles, as opposed to what we might call, with no disrespect to anyone, jobbing recruiters who dealt with the hiring. So I think where we're at is technology is taking away heavy lifting at a time when teams are not good, or the hiring team is not going to increase its size, but is going to take on more responsibility, expand broader in the same way as you have into the people functions, particularly internal mobility, learning and development. I think the other area that I'm really interested in your take on is how far we're moving and what part technology is playing in moving towards skills hiring, as opposed to the way in which we've always hired, which has been for experience, for history.
Yeah. One, it has to be a mindset shift for an organization. So we could say all day we're moving to a skills hiring recruitment process, but if the organization doesn't actually do that in practice, then we could be saying it all day.
Yeah,
right?
hiring manager saying, show me 3 years. And you're going, but 3 years means they haven't done it, but they have done this. And
right. Or why is there a gap on your resume? Like, that's still a question people ask. Like, do I have the skill or do I not? Right. So we can say we're moving to a skill-based hiring, which I do believe there is a significant shift in that. in the sense that we should have a significant shift in that. I don't think every employer has prioritized it in the sense of overhauling all of their tools and systems to look for skills over tenure or skills over credential, right? It's what's that old not necessarily a joke, maybe it's a meme of, an experienced plumber takes, 10 minutes to fix something and charges you 10 times as much as somebody else who comes in and takes a few hours to do it. And you say, I can't believe I paid you all this money for 10 minutes of your time. And it's like, you didn't pay me for 10 minutes of my time. You paid me for my skill and a lifetime of knowing how to do this in 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And so, again, if we want to have a productive employee pool, we want to have our teams feel that they were hired to do what they know how to do well, then you have to change a little bit of your assessment tools internally, right? It can't just simply be, tell me, what you've been doing the last few years. Tell me why you moved from this organization to that organization. It has to be a little bit more over the skills and over the formal education, if you will, and the practice over theory. And so that's the first thing, right? So how do you make sure that your organization is gauging those skills accurately? How are they incorporating the assessments appropriately? How are they putting those practical use cases into that hiring process to be able to measure what they're looking for? I would almost argue is that sometimes, an organization may not exactly know what they're looking for either. You hear that a lot, like I'll know it when I see it. And that's why maybe hiring practices take so long, because they're not 100% sure what it is they need, or there's multiple pieces moving within a department or a team, and I can't quite really say I need this 100% until I maybe fill the other role, right? And so you've got this dance that happens with, I've met really great talent and they've all got these really interesting skills, and some of the people are very different from each other, and yet they're both qualified for the job based on, sort of whatever shoe drops or whatever move we make, or whatever we decide to move forward. So, I think the focusing on skills, first of all, what I like about the focusing on skills is that it actually opens up, I think, the talent pool to just a broader group of people. Where in the past, I think there was a lot of lack of socioeconomic diversity or education diversity or regional diversity based on the skill you were looking for. And so now if you open it up to skill versus maybe the credentials or formality, it does open up your talent pool. Couple that with a time in our lives where many of our jobs are remote first or capable of being remote, it does even more so expand your talent pool to different geographies and different folks in different locations that you may have never touched base with in the past. And so I think that's really important too. And then, you and I have talked about this, this transition of moving towards, generations that want to start looking at, new collar work and skilled work, and work when I'm working, off when I'm off type of jobs, which is very different than maybe the example they had of their parents these days. And how do we make sure we promote career pathways for that generation coming into the workforce to be able to, showcase their skill, be very good at it, and then still have a growth in their lifetime and in their career progression.
And what part do you think AI and technology is playing in this?
Very personally, right, where I am now, our products support a manufacturing and production health. And so when I think about that industry, the world of manufacturing, maybe the world of delivery and truck driving and all different kinds of roles that have been told over and over again, the machines are coming for your job. And yet the people are still there. I think what's been interesting to see is there's a generation that is not adverse to going into those roles because they do believe that there will be a relationship with technology, that they can bring a skill to it, that it doesn't feel like the job of old or the way that it had been portrayed, through their lifetime, that there will be this ability to enhance and progress an industry forward by using technology, again, as the augmentation, not as the replacement.
So hiring people to augment, and really when you're assessing and what you're looking for is a demonstration or demonstratable capability to change and evolve and learn new things, which means you're looking for a blank slate again, really.
So sometimes, right, or just even the comfortability with change, or the comfortability with using a technology versus the fear of technology, the willingness to, how do you hear often, right? Oh, it's a little bit. We're going through this time in our organization right now. You have to be comfortable with ambiguity. Like, look, is anybody really comfortable with ambiguity? I mean, people are just more comfortable with it than others. But that's a thing you hear a lot in conversations with candidates. And of course, yes, I'm comfortable with it, or I thrive in it, or I'm okay. I pivot quickly and move through processes really fast. I can change as needed, and if you're in an industry where you're expecting there to be quick pivots or changes, or that it may need to evolve in the next however many years, you're going to want people to join your organization who are going to be comfortable making that change with you, versus the naysayers or the ones who pull down the ideas, or a bit of the laggards, if you will.
So you're looking for very different people to perhaps who we might have done historically 5 years ago, in terms of looking for skills. You're looking for mindset. Very much you've talked about culture fit and personality in terms of how people want to approach things, what they will need to demonstrate to you in the interview or assessment process. All of this feels like that takes more of the human time, which is why we need the technology to do the heavy lifting, because you need more time.
Yeah. I mean, we keep coming back to this, right? And again, I hope that whoever joined this call and was listening today didn't come to this saying like, my job is going to be taken over, is hearing us say, look, there's so many things you can do and continue to do.
And need to do. There's so many things that have become essential in this world.
That's right. That you're going to continue to need to do, to make it work. And like you said, it's a mindset. But a mindset is also, when you talk about people who like continuous learning, that's a mindset, right? Again, people who are self-taught, that's a type of person that you're looking for. People who are able to, like we said, adopt a new skill, very quickly and implement it and start working with it. People who are comfortable with change, or at least get comfortable with change maybe quicker, if that's the company you're leading right now, or are working in. Again, there's no one size fits all, because every organization is different. That's why interviews occur. If every job is the same, we would just place people in a role. But you interview because organizations are different, what they need at the time. And then keep in mind, organizations change. So what worked for your company 10 years ago may be obsolete now, or may not be needed 10 years from now, or might be, just looks so different than it used to. And so how do you make sure you stay, current, and you stay evolving with the rapidly changing specialized roles that you have?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's super exciting that we're looking at this evolution, which is saying everything we've been wanting for so long, we need to be more human, and we're going to let the machines do all that stuff. I think everything at the top of the funnel pretty much can be done whether that's the sourcing, the attraction, the understanding the role, putting the job spec together, doing all this kind of stuff in a much better way so that you have more time to spend with people in that relationship. I mean, ultimately, I think we've always wanted, if we can get to a point where in our funnel is our shortlist and the volume is dealt away, how much better is hiring going to be?
Yeah, well, it should be better. It should be better. It also, I mean, again, humans make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Humans lie. So at some point, do I think it's going to be perfect? Nothing's ever going to be perfect. I don't think that we'll ever say, a 1-for-1 every single time. But you do hope that you start to see that the quality of hire is better.
And just the quality of candidate, the quality of candidate, right. The quality of candidate experience, all of that. If we shrink the funnel and have less people in there and have more time for all the interactions that we need and to make the right assessments that we need to be making on that person, it's got to be better for everybody.
And look, we keep talking about it from the candidate pool, but people are using AI to write their job description. So you go way back to like even just the posting.
Sure.
What you need to be.
They're a lot better, by the way.
They're a lot better. But again, it's just like we were saying, a candidate uses AI to help them write their resume, and doesn't necessarily spot check it. And there's some things on there that are a little fluffed or and you go, oh, that really maybe wasn't right. There are some recruiters out there who are just copying and pasting job descriptions and not really reading them, going, oh, that's actually really not who we are, and that's not really the job. So again, using it to help you is one thing. Using it to replace you is different.
You deserve to be replaced in that.
And that's the difference, right? And so if you are going to use it to replace you, then that's a different conversation.
Take the consequences.
Take the consequences.
When you get replaced, because the machines.
That's right. You should be looking at it. Right. You should be looking at it to say, how did I use this to maybe get the right word that I want, or make this more grammatically correct, or write this in a way that was more in a formal writing, because my writing style is maybe more casual, or it's not about the original thought. The AI is supposed to help you, not have the original thought for you,
and supervise it rather than do it. I think is the key thing. I think it's our value is in what we know rather than what we do in the modern age, which I'm super excited about. So we've just about come to the end of our conversation. I could continue talking for hours, I can assure you. But what would you bring up? What would you want to leave people with as a parting thought?
Yeah, we've changed the name over the years so many times, but as many times as we change it, it still comes back to either human resources or people. Again, every company might have called it something different throughout the years, but it still comes back to human resources or people. And I would really say, you got to keep the human in human resources. You got to keep the people in the people operations function. That is truly what's going to differentiate your organization, is that ability to have the relationship person to person over time that hopefully will get you great talent or great employee.
And I think now we have the time to do that with technology taking over. So thank you so much for your time. That's a great closing thought. Where can anyone get in touch with you if they want to follow up on anything or just connect with you in general?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn's always a great place for me. I am open to connections on LinkedIn. I don't shun those away. So really am active on there and post a lot. And so I would love to see more people through that network, so I can keep in touch that way as well.
Danelle, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
See you all next week.